And I don't want, okay, hang on, stop share. Okay, I think this is all working. All right, hey, you guys. Yeah, this is quite a learning curve for everybody, even for me, figuring out how to do this. Anyways, awesome. You guys are here. Hopefully you'll be better be watching this, and we shall continue in our class on Islam. Okay, so last class we went through talking a little bit about the religious beliefs in Arabia prior to the rise of Islam. And for those of you who have missed it, I will be doing a little video on that, okay, just so you can catch up on that. And also just in case you want to see things again, I mean, it won't be a repeat of what I did, but it'll have most of what I did in class. And yeah, so that's what we did last session is we talked about some of the religious beliefs and practices in Arabia prior to the rise of Islam. And then we looked at the life of Muhammad and the rise and birthing of Islam, okay? And so here now, what we're going to be covering, and we'll see how far we get, the ongoing development of Islam, historically, how it got established and how it spread, and then the key beliefs and practices, Islamic law, the main sects of Sunni versus Shia. Yeah, we'll kind of see how far we get here right now, okay? I want to kind of keep this to 1 hour and chunk it up a little bit, so let's see how it goes, okay? So I'm going to just share my screen in terms of, and hopefully this all works. And that's not what I want. And now, oh yes, this is how I go over here. And let's see what happens if this is, I think this is what I want. No, that's not what I want. This is what I want. Oh, okay. So, oh no, I need to move. Hang on, no, go away. Oh, so hang on. If I'm I want to move that. How can I move that? Because it's in the way. Blocking. Ah, there we go. This is what I want to share. So now, can you see this? Now I want to have me here. Okay, good. Okay, so I think this is all working. Okay, so now to continue on here, where we ended was with the death of Muhammad, and that led to a big issue as to who's going to be leading the Muslim movement from here on, the Muslim community. And so who is to be the successor of Muhammad? And here the word caliph or caliph means successor. And so what we have here coming up are going to be, and I should have made it bold. I thought I did. Hang on here, didn't I in the next one? Oh, I did here, I made it bold. Okay, yeah, the names, Abu Bakr, Omar, Uthman, Ali. These four who become the successors, the leaders of the Muslim community after Muhammad, they're often referred to as the rightly guided caliphs, okay? Believing that there was basic agreement in the community that they were sanctioned by Allah to be indeed the leaders over the Muslim community. So what happens? As I mentioned last class, Muhammad died rather quickly and suddenly. And so things were a little bit up in the air, whether or not, in terms of what was going to happen. And so there are basically two options here. As you can see here at the bottom of this slide, we're going to see here now the beginnings of a major split in Islam is over this issue of leadership, who's to be the successor of Muhammad. There are basically two options or choices here. Either the leader would be someone who would be elected. Okay, this is going to be sort of the side of the Sunnis. And this was the process that was done in ancient Arabia in terms of electing the chief, who would be the chief of the tribe. And, it was rather electoral kind of process that the best qualified, the most experienced, a matter of, chosen by the community would become the leader. The other option was dynastic, is the next of kin. So if Muhammad had a son, the son would then be the next leader. And so it's rather dynastic, almost like a monarchy, right? And so those are basically the two options. And Muhammad didn't have any sons who were alive or lived, but he did have a daughter who married his cousin Ali. And they had then two sons, Hassan and Hussein. And so they would then be the grandsons of Muhammad. So there was one camp. They're going to become known as the Shia, which is abbreviation, or the term basically meaning they were the supporters or the partisans of Ali, who felt that Ali should be the successor. Okay. And and there is a tradition that indeed at a certain place at one time, Muhammad did say, in some way that intimating that perhaps Ali would be, should be the leader after him. It's a little bit debated if, what did he mean by what he said and various things. There's a lot of detail in history here, okay? I don't want to get into that. But I do have some great videos on this stuff that you can watch, okay? So anyways, right away, there's a bit of a tension. Well, to make a long story short, basically the community went through the way of the best qualified, again, just to keep it short and simple. So Abu Bakr, he was a very old man already at this time. He was with Muhammad right from the very beginning, was one of his close companions. And in fact, later on, Muhammad's going to marry one of his, well, I shouldn't say later on because Muhammad's already dead. Muhammad did marry a daughter of Abu Bakr, that's Aisha, who's very young. And that's where there's, in the Muslim community, was she 8 years old when they were actually even younger, maybe 6 when the marriage was arranged, but then consummated when she was 8 or something. And, that's a bit of a controversial topic, but most Muslims hold that she was very, very young as a girl given in marriage. And that has supported that belief and practice going back to Muhammad has supported then the practice of marriages to very young girls in the Muslim world. So anyways, Abu Bakr was already a very old man, close companion, held to be the one to be the leader. He only lived for another 2 years because he was already an old man. Right at the outset, there was a revolt. There were those who, because of these tribal alliances that I talked about before, who felt like, oh, wow, Muhammad is dead. Maybe now we can free ourselves from Muslim rule. And there was a revolt. And a war takes place immediately. And those who refused to accept Islam and the rule of a Muslim ruler, were put to death. And this whole event is what then led to what will become a part of Sharia law. Is apostasy is a crime that is to lead to death. You're not allowed to leave Islam. That sort of becomes a law as a result of this conflict that happened right away. So very quickly, though, under Abu Bakr, the rest of Arabia comes under the rule of Islam, okay? And as I had mentioned in the previous class, it was clear that Muhammad's intention was that this was a religion that was for the whole world. The whole world was to be brought into the house of Islam. And you basically have 2 houses. There's the house of Islam and the house of the unbelievers out there, which is the house of war. Okay, that's sort of the name for them. And that's why when people talk about the pillars of Islam, those are the pillars that uphold the house of Islam that everybody is to come into. Okay, so anyway, so Abu Bakr is only for another 2 years, and then he dies. Then next comes into power, so to speak, here is Omar, right? And here you can see it's written in the more anglicized way, Umar in the more Arabic way. He comes into power here, and he only rules for about 10 years, and then he ended up getting assassinated. But he is known for a few things, key things here for us at this point. He further expands Islam, as you can see here, throughout the Middle East, right? Palestine, Syria, Iraq, Persia, Egypt, major spreading of Islam. The goal here is largely, again, conquest, to spread Islam. And people didn't necessarily have to convert to Islam. They needed to submit to Muslim rule and pay extra taxes. Okay, it's called the dhimmi. They'd have to pay extra higher taxes. They would have a second-class status, a status where the houses couldn't be bigger than a Muslim house. Mosques would be built on top of churches or higher than a church, or various things like this is what would take place. And one thing he did is he established the Muslim calendar. So in Islam, they have their own calendar that's different from our modern Western, i.e. Christian calendar. It's a lunar base, just like the Jewish calendar. And the beginning of the calendar goes back to the time of the migration to Medina, the Hijrah, in the year 622. Okay, so the year 623 would be year 1, AH, a Latin phrase for meaning after the Hijrah. Okay. So they have their own calendar. So those are 2 key things. Well, then after his death, it really got intense again as to who is to be the caliph. There were the Sunni versus the Shia, those who felt like, hey, Ali is now more mature, he's the one who should be it, yada, yada. And so they basically agreed at this point that, okay, we agree here now that for now we will let Uthman be the caliph, which is the Sunni side, but we promise that after him, for sure, Ali will be the next caliph, okay? So there's kind of a bit of a compromise and negotiation that takes place to kind of keep the peace. And so Uthman then becomes the next caliph. Under him, there's further expansion of Islam into North Africa. And a big thing with Othman is the event of the codification of the Quran takes place. Okay, the codification of the Quran. And what happens here, you know, the Quran, as I mentioned the last class, the word itself means the recitation, because the first revelations that Muhammad got was the command that was given to recite. It was meant to be spoken forth, these words, these revelations that he was getting. And so that people would have memorized some of these recitations, these words. Some were written down here and there on this and that. And then at his death, compiled together, okay, under Abu Bakr and others. They tried to compile things. And then there were the specialists who would memorize the whole of the Quran, because it wasn't so much a written book as it was a spoken book. And so it had been memorized. So what happened under Othman, as various groups of Muslims were brought together, like some troops from Iraq, from Syria, from Arabia, from whatever different places, as they were going forth in spreading Islam. And before they'd go into battle, they would have the different reciters reciting the Quran. The general at the time realized and saw and heard that, wow, some of them had differences. There were differences in the texts that they had memorized. And so there wasn't one universally used, accepted, memorized Quran, that there are variations. And this is a serious issue if this is, quote, the word of God. And so he right away goes to Othman and says, listen, we've got a problem here. And so under Othman, he brings about all the reciters, whatever material they had, and then basically determines and concludes what they were going to go for in terms of what they would regard as being the orthodox text, the one that's actually the closest to the real revelations, the truth, what have you, okay? And then he decreed that all other text versions, whatever, it would be destroyed, that only copies would be made from this one and sent out to the major cities in the Muslim empire, and from here it should be memorized. End of story, no questions asked. And that's what's meant by the codification of the Quran. That's generally held to have taken place around 650. And so it's known as the Uthmanic Codex. And so this comes into place. Now, that was one issue for some people. There were those who did not like this whole affair, had, anyways, real concerns about it, it seems. And then there are also other issues. Othman, even though he's very devout and religious as a Muslim believer, he was very much influenced by a lot of his relatives. And a lot of his relatives came into positions of power throughout the Muslim empire. Now you can imagine, this is a huge empire now. And so who is it that's ruling over various regions, becoming extremely wealthy, believe me. Okay, they're going into these various regions and countries and coming into huge wealth and power. Okay, and so there were those who were feeling that there was a lot of corruption going on, that only a certain family line and relatives were coming into power. So again, to make a long story short, there was about hundreds of people, maybe about 900 or so, outside of his palace with grievances against Othman over these sorts of things, and demanding an end to what they thought was corruption, or again, I don't know all the details, who does? And they surge into his palace, and while he's reading the Quran, he gets killed. And so that was the end of Othman. So it had been agreed that Ali would be the next caliph, okay? But things are a bit rocky here. So in the meantime, we have this huge empire, and even though Ali is now officially the caliph, there were those who weren't accepting his rulership. his succession, his being the caliph, especially a particular governor over in Syria known as Muawiyah. And maybe yeah, I may as well start going into this next one. As you can see here, here's his name, Muawiyah. Okay, this is all being recorded, right? I hope so, because I don't want to be doing this for nothing. Yeah, I think it is good. Okay, and so what happens is that Muawiyah refuses to acknowledge Ali as being the caliph. Okay, absolutely refuses to do that. Again, long story, a lot of history. There's going to be some revolts and tensions here. Now, as I had mentioned, Ali had two sons. The first one, Hassan, and I don't have his name written down here, Hassan, Hassan, you know, who didn't really cause too many problems, all right, to make a long story short. But then down the road, Hussein, who's the younger brother, Hussein, he's going to start causing real problems here. And again, to make a long story short, what happens is that when Yazid, who is Muawiyah's son, comes into power, Ali's son Hussein, who was revolting against this, saying, no, really, it should be mine. It should have gone from my father down to me instead of over to Muawiyah, creates a bit of a problem here. And Yazid literally ambushes Hussein and his whole family and butchers them, you know, in a very literal sense. Okay, it's absolutely terrible. Even a baby, even, you know, literally, you know, chops his body up into pieces at Karbala, Iraq. And this is absolutely terrible event. And so to make, again, very long story short, okay, right? Because there's always so much to everything. This event of the butchering of Hussein's family, who is the very grandson of the Prophet Muhammad, was seen as such a terrible, offensive crime, an evil crime, that the division between the Sunni and the Shia could just really never get resolved, okay? Seriously. And again, just, you know, so you know, today, most of the conflict in the Muslim world is between the Sunni and the Shia. In Iraq, you know what, all the fighting is going on. The Iraq War, you know, they were wanting to invade, and when they invaded Kuwait years ago, and then Iran is a threat. Iran is predominantly Shiite, and then many Shia are living in Iraq. And Saddam Hussein was Sunni and had strong power, kind of kept a lid on the tensions between the Sunni and the Shia. But as a result of the Iraq War and getting rid of Saddam Hussein, it's just like opened up a time bomb here, because a lot of the conflict going on over there here now is between the Sunni and the Shia. It's really serious stuff. They hate each other, and basically the Sunni regard the Shia as heretics, and I don't know, it's just, you know, messy. So just be aware of that, okay? Just so you know, it has roots going way back here. So what happens is that basically the Sunnis kind of end up having their way with Muawiyah becoming the caliph. But ironically, what happens now? The caliphate becomes dynastic anyway. It stays within the family line. So it goes from Muawiyah to his son Yazid, and on you go, okay? So yeah, so much for that. So the Umayyads were predominantly Sunni. They are in power, and they solidly establish Islam through the whole North Africa, going into Spain and Europe, right, the Middle East, over throughout parts of Central Asia, going all the way to India and Indonesia. We have what develops into a huge Muslim empire, all right, absolutely huge. Okay, so now the Umayyads, you know, they really focused more on material development, if you like, in terms of conquest and holding a huge area in power, all right? And increasingly, people were feeling that they were corrupt. There was a lot of displeasure with the Umayyads. The sense was that they have sort of abandoned the spirit of Islam, that they were just out for wealth and power is generally a sense of it. They tended to treat so many non-Arabs as second-class citizens. And especially there's a lot of displeasure about all this in ancient Persia, which is today Iran. And so what happens here is we have a revolt that takes place and a new regime that comes into power over the Muslim world known as the Abbasids, the Abbasid Caliphate, developing in the year 750, rising out of Persia. And they claimed that their leader was a relative related to Muhammad's uncle, Al-Abbas, and that's where Abbasid comes from, okay? And they come into power in the year 750. They make Baghdad their capital city, whereas Damascus was the capital city of the Umayyads over in Syria, because again, Muawiyah was the governor of Syria and established that as his power base. Okay, so now with the Abbasids coming out of Persia, because they were Persians and not Arabs, and they had a more they were a bit more liberal. They had a more open mind approach to things. They opened themselves up to exploring Greek philosophy when they kind of got exposed to that through this Muslim conquest. They came across Greek philosophy and thought and opened up to more of a rational kind of approach to things, questions various things, where they were open to dialogue with other religions in terms of they would allow Jews and Christians and others into the court for dialogue. And so we see here a time of real intellectual activity happening under the Abbasids. And as a result, we have the rise of the golden age of Islam under their rule as a result of this, okay? However, it's not going to last, as we'll see. We'll talk about that more down the road here. And however, what happens though in 1258, so after a few hundred years, we have the Mongolian invasion that totally destroyed the capital city, killed the royal household, and brought an end to the caliphate altogether. Things are just totally destroyed. Well, then shortly after though, we have the rise of the Ottoman Empire. And it gets its name from Osman, who was the ruler, the head of a Turkish tribe, who came, into leadership, so to speak, and ended up reestablishing the Muslim empire known as the Ottoman Empire of most of the Middle East, North Africa, the Balkans, etc. Okay, so that goes on until if we come into World War I, and basically things come into more colonial rule at that point in terms of a lot of the Middle East, various regions. The Ottoman Empire had already been deeply decayed and decline. The rest of the world was modern, and yet the Muslim world was still very much a medieval world, okay, in terms of no technological. Islam closed the door to learning, to development of any kind. And do watch some of the videos that I have listed at the end. Okay, that's really, really insightful in terms of how science got killed, all kinds of things. And so the Ottoman Empire was in serious decline and decay, whereas the rest of the world was, especially Europe, launching into modernity in a pretty massive way, obviously, right? So anyways, yeah, it just basically collapses under colonial and comes under colonial rule, a lot of the Muslim world at that point. Then in the meantime, we have over in, as you see here, Persia, which ancient Persia, today called Iran, parts of Pakistan and Afghanistan, came under Shiite rule. The Shia, they established the Safavid dynasty over there, as you can see, for a couple hundred years. And then over in India, Mughal rule got established. That's a Muslim empire that ruled over most of India until it collapses and comes under British rule, okay, in 1857, okay? And that's a whole story there, which was, quite devastating to a lot of India. So much got destroyed at that time. And when we did Hinduism, I show a video there, and 20 million Hindus or people in India were put to death just within a 100-year period as a result of the Mughal conquest that took place there. So anyway, this is a bit of an overview of just the history at this point. Okay, and we'll pick up a little bit more on the modern world in a bit later on. Maybe not today, but another time. Okay, so what are some of the central beliefs in Islam? And here we'll kind of go through in terms of what's expected that all Muslims are to believe. And the first thing, okay, this is so foundational to Islam, is this key idea that there is no God but Allah. There's only one God, and only God is God. And nothing is equal to God, nothing can compare to God, nothing can share in the beingness of God. Only God is God, okay? And that Muhammad is his messenger. well, actually, I should just have that is what is always confessed right here now. The focus, I should actually erase that. That is going to really fall into the messenger part. But to become a Muslim, as I'll briefly mention later, you just need to make a public confession that you believe that there is no God but Allah and that Muhammad is his messenger. Publicly confess that you are a Muslim. Okay, and so key thing, there is no God but Allah. Is huge idea. The unity of God is usually referred to, Tawheed, the oneness of God, meaning that there is nothing at all that is like God. What makes God is the uniqueness of who and what God all is. And the key concept behind God in Islam is that God is all powerful. That's why it's Allahu Akbar. God is most great. There is nothing bigger, greater, more powerful than God. That is what makes God, is that God is all powerful. That is what sets God apart from everything else, is the power of God. And nothing can limit the power of God. That's almost the worst thing you could think of or admit to, that anything could limit the power of God, because that implies there's something greater than God if it can limit him. Okay, that becomes a big thing in terms of Muslim theology, right? And I have, I think, a slide on that in terms of a bit of a debate that happens in Islam. So then throughout the Quran, it always mentions that he has no partner, he has no equal. It doesn't say that so much, but it always says he has no partner, he is not begotten, and he does not beget, meaning there's no son of God. And so that idea of no partner, equal, son, that kind of talk is direct statements against the Trinity. Okay, and that, again, the total rejection of the Trinity. The idea of a Trinity that you have in Christianity is often seen as a type of polytheism, really. Okay, and so the worst sin in Islam is shirk, meaning that you make an association to divinity with something. You give something a divine power or a divine attribute in some way. That is called shirk, and that is the worst sin. This is something that has a huge role in Muslim thought, spirituality, daily living, all kinds of ways. So, for example, classic example is that in Islam, you don't have any real three-dimensional art. There's no sculptures that are made. There's no paintings like the Sistine Chapel, for example, or, people of the likes of Michelangelo, the sculpture of David or the Sistine Chapel. You don't have any of that. That is forbidden in Islam, because for you to create something that looks very realistic, if it be through painting or sculpture, it is though you are acting like God. You're trying to be like God, like, oh, look at me, I can create. And it's like, no, only God can create. That is shirk. That is a sin. You are trying to associate a divine attribute with yourself. Okay, you're acquiring it for yourself as though I am a creator like God. That is a sin. Okay. So that's an example of shirk. Another example would be in classic Persian rugs, the Persian rugs that are, arabesque kind of patterns. I have a few here, I have a few of them myself. And in a traditional, authentic Persian rug, which is really, everything's quite geometrical, right? There's like a pattern there, and it's always, it's geometrical, and it mirrors each other and all that. And so what you'll find here is there's going to be somewhere a little flaw, somewhere where there's going to be something amiss on this rug. Why? Because only God is perfect. And so you don't want to create the perfect rug without any kind of flaw, everything being perfectly, geometrical, the pattern that's there. You don't want to make that sin. Okay. And so this is a key thing. To worship or to be afraid of somebody, to live in fear, like, oh, that person might get me, or this might happen, this might happen. You are turning them into a god. You should only fear God and no one and nothing else. And so to fear anything or people is a form of shirk. You're attributing them a power that really only God can have and should have, all right, to evoke fear in us. So you shouldn't fear anyone. You shouldn't worship money and just like, oh, I love money and I want to be successful and da da da. It's shirk. You are worshiping money. You should only worship God. You should only seek to please God, right? That's kind of how this will play out in various ways. Okay. Another key thing with this whole idea of God being all powerful in Islam is this issue that do we have free will? Is there anything that happens in this world that is not within the will of Allah? Okay, that's going to be a big thing. And here they have to hold that no. Everything that happens in the world is indeed in alignment with the will of Allah. Because if there was something that happened that did not reflect the will of Allah, that implies that there is a power outside of Allah and greater than Allah. And therefore, if Allah is all powerful, that means that everything that happens is the will of Allah. Okay. And so that's why I'll be often saying that, oh, okay, I'm going to go get some groceries and hopefully there'll be bread and milk there today, especially today, or some meat to buy. If it be the will of Allah, I'll be back in an hour with some supper, for us. Everything that you do is, if it's the will of Allah, it'll happen. If it's the will of Allah, okay? And this is why it's going to lead to a big issue in terms of the development of science, where there are no laws of the universe that just operate mechanically independently as laws of physics on their own. It's like no. The reason why when I have this match and on a matchbox and I strike the the flint there and it lights up, the reason why that happens is not because of a natural physical law of cause and effect, is because it's the will of Allah. And if it's the will of Allah, it doesn't happen, it won't happen. So, and that is one big thing that really killed the development of science, okay, in the history of Islam, is this emphasis on everything that happens is the will of Allah, period. Okay. It's a huge thing. And so it's going to lead to the idea that I'm kind of jumping ahead here. Yeah, I'll come back to this. Well, yeah, a bit later, okay, because I'm kind of jumping ahead to the debate between the Mutazilites and the Asharites on this, okay, and I'll talk about that a bit later. Okay, so anyways, I'm going to leave that. So key thing then, with this concept of God like that, the meaning of Islam, everybody says, oh, it means peace, it's related to the Hebrew word shalom, but actually they're missing the beginning part of it. The only way to peace is through submission to the will of Allah. That's the only way to peace, is through submission to the will of Allah. And if you don't submit to the will of Allah, there will be no peace. And that's what the root meaning of Islam is. And that's what it means to be a Muslim. A Muslim is someone who submits to the will of Allah. Okay, this is a key idea. Okay, so that's number one, okay, is that there is no God but God. And what makes God God is that God is all powerful. Okay. All right. To believe in his messengers. So it's believed that across time and space, Allah has indeed sent messengers because, well, we need to know God. Okay. We need to know what to believe, what to think, what's right, what's wrong, whatever. We need revelations. Okay. And so in the Quran, it mentions, various figures from the Bible. And as you can see, it's all drawing from the Bible, from the biblical Jewish tradition, largely, okay? And so the first prophet is deemed to have been Adam. And there's mentioned, Abraham, I got a list here. Noah, Abraham, Ishmael, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Job, Solomon, Elijah, Zechariah, many such figures. Jesus himself as well. They're all prophets. And however, Muhammad is the last of all the prophets. And with him, we have the seal of prophecy, the closing of prophecy. There's no more need of any more prophets, okay? Because through the prophet of Muhammad, we have the Quran itself, and it's perfect, it's complete. We don't need any more prophecies. We don't need any more revelations. We've got everything in the Quran as the perfect revelation, okay? Now, a key thing about all these prophets, the belief here in Islam, is that they're all sinless and perfect, okay? And that's very much against the Jewish tradition, okay? They don't hold that. That they are without any sin, and they're all perfect human beings, and that they have some kind of proof that they are a prophet. They have a gift of miracles. There's some kind of a miracle that they do that proves that they are indeed a prophet. And for Muhammad, it is the Quran itself. So the tradition develops in Islam that he was illiterate. And the Quran itself is a poetic work that is deemed to be, a beautiful, amazing masterpiece. How could an illiterate man have come up with such a masterpiece? So that is the miracle that is associated with Muhammad. Okay. Now, oh yeah, and I mentioned, do I have that here? Yeah. So this is a tradition, is that we have a list of various 26 or something like that prophets are mentioned. They're all biblical figures, with Muhammad being the last, are mentioned in the Quran. But later on, Muslim theologians say, it goes beyond that they're literally, some have even said 200,000 messengers have been sent throughout the world to all peoples in various times and places, people we don't even know, who have been messengers sent by Allah to bring the word of God to people to know, so they will know how to live. Okay. So that then leads to the third key concept here, is to believe in the revelations. These revelations, because the key thing is we need to be rightly guided. We need to be guided as to what's right, what's wrong, what is the will of Allah. How should we live, right? We need to be rightly guided. And so that's why these revelations are being sent to us. So it's held that, yes, the revelations that are referred to in the Quran is the Torah, i.e. to the Jews, okay, referring to the Torah, the books of Moses. Zabur is a term for the Psalms of David, okay, for the Psalms of David. And Injil is the term for the Gospels, okay, in terms of the revelations given through Jesus, okay. So here is just specifically the books of Moses, David, and Jesus are books that are sent. And so Jews and Christians are called often people of the book, okay. Now, the thing is that it's held that, yes, Allah has sent these revelations to the Jews, the Christians, and whatnot, but they've become distorted, they've gotten lost, they've been messed up with, people have corrupted them, and that's why we still needed the revelation to come, and we finally now have it without any contamination, totally perfect and pure, nothing wrong whatsoever in it, through Muhammad. We have a perfect copy of the mother of the book, the preserved tablet. So it's believed that the Quran here on earth in Arabic, okay, literally letter for letter, is an exact copy of this book that exists up in heaven. Okay, it's called the preserved tablet. Now, this is a very ancient idea, because we even way back to the Sumerians, they talk about tablets that the gods have up there, that the decrees, where they decree your future, your destiny, is in a book in heaven. It's a very ancient idea. Okay, so this is what the Quran is held to be, is an exact copy, perfectly brought down to earth through Muhammad, without corruption. And traditional teachings in Islam is that, before Muhammad died, the angel Gabriel, who's the angel of revelation, who brought these revelations to Muhammad, because again, you can't directly see God or have direct contact with God. So it needs to be channeled through a mediator, like the angel Gabriel of revelation, who then just checked through it all just to make sure everything's, hunky-dory, perfect in these texts here before Muhammad died. Right? However, as I mentioned, we know that that's not quite the case, as I mentioned, with the Uthmanic Codex. Okay, and so the Quran also later on, in terms of theological debate, and I'll talk about that in a couple of slides down here, is in traditional Orthodox teachings, it is believed to be the eternal, uncreated speech of Allah. Meaning that the Quran is not a historical book written in historical time by humans, but if it is the word of God, and again, it's all taken real, if it's the word of God, well, Allah is eternal. Allah was never created, and therefore his speech, his words, are also eternal and uncreated. Okay, and therefore this becomes the official Orthodox position, that the Quran is the eternal, uncreated speech of God, valid across time, across space, for eternity, never to be changed. All right. Okay. This is where we have in Islam the most extreme view of Scripture in any religion. Okay, it is the most absolute and extreme in this regard. And it can pose some challenges that like, well, oh, is this passage only applicable in a certain historical context or not? You know, there's some tensions here. Like it's challenging. How do you deal with some of this stuff if you have this then as sort of the orthodox position? Okay, and this is what moderate Muslims are trying to address, and it's a challenge. Okay, just so you're aware of some of the challenges in Islam today. Um, so now I was going to say something. I was thinking something. Oh yeah. Now, and it's here. Okay, so the book itself, the Quran, is made up of 114 chapters. In Islam, they're known as surahs. Okay, basically 114 chapters. It is predominantly a poetic work. It is not a historical narrative the way the Bible generally is. Okay, it's more a poetic work. And as such, each chapter sort of is seen as constituting a revelation given at a certain time. And what unifies that chapter is the rhythmic flow of it as a piece of poetry. Okay, that's largely what unites it, is the rhythmic flow of it as a piece of poetic work. Not necessarily content, not necessarily that it's talking about a particular topic. It may be doing that, but predominantly it's poetic in nature, okay? And so it's arranged as a poetic work would have been done in Arabia. And just like, you know, how I mentioned last class, poetry was sort of the big art in ancient Arabia, was sort of the thing that they did, was had poetic contests and whatnot, okay? So here it's arranged according to poetry that the longest passages, I think the longest passages come first and the short to the shortest. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's the longest to the shortest. I should know this. I know. I got everything on notes somewhere. Yeah, the longest to the shortest. Yeah. And so basically, so it's not necessarily in historical context or that this is an earlier one and that's a later one. No, it's just simply about length. So they're arranged according to length, longest chapter down to the shortest. Okay. And then the title for the chapter is simply, you know, a key word that shows up in the first couple of sentences. So you could have a chapter title called Cows, or The Table, or Women, or something. And you think, oh, is this a chapter talking about cows or something? Not necessarily. It's just that happens to be a word that shows up in the first couple of sentences. That's how they arranged Arabic poetry. Okay. Now, one thing is that anybody who reads the Quran, or Muslims and scholars, they always make note whether this was a revelation given at Mecca or a revelation given at Medina. Okay, whether it's Meccan or Medina. And one thing is in terms of a policy, because you will have conflicting texts here. As I mentioned in class, in Mecca, the focus was that fiery message to the people of Mecca that there's only one God, Allah, that you should not worship other gods, that the Kaaba should be, you know, his house alone, that you are to worship him in, basically was his intent, to purify it of idolatry, and that there's a judgment day coming, and if you don't repent and stop worshiping all these other gods, you will be doomed to hell. Okay, that was basically his message. Very, you know, fiery kind of a message. And then later in Medina, we get more judicial type, legislative type messages as to, you know, dealing with marriage rights and divorce, and, you know, how to worship, how to pray, how to fast, you know, various things like that. Okay, so it changes in nature. But also in Mecca, you know, you find the nicer ones of saying that should be no compulsion in matters of religion. People shouldn't be coerced in terms of religion. Okay, but whereas over in Medina, it starts becoming a bit nastier, especially between Jews and Christians. At first, the Jews and Christians, oh, they're also believers in one God. They're the people of the book. They're part of this whole journey of revelations. But then later, because of his being rejected by a lot of the Jews there at Medina, and they're betraying him, it changes. The revelations change. They become more hostile towards Jews and Christians, that you can't trust them, don't make friends with them, da 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 da. So you find a shift there. So there can be conflicting revelations here. And the basic policy is abrogation, so that later revelations that are given at Medina, they are to override and overrule the earlier revelations wherever there's a conflict. So if you're asking, gee, which one do I believe? You would believe the latest revelations. They always override earlier revelations. Okay, that's a major approach and policy here in the study and reading of the Quran. Okay. Anything else I wanted to say here? But oh, just yeah, I did have somebody did a content analysis. Where do I have that here? Here it is. Yeah, content analysis of the Quran. And that basically 30% of the Quran talks about the glory of God, the nature of God, the attributes of God, the revelations of coming from God via the Quran, of the role of the prophets of Muhammad, that this is his divine mission. About 30% is that sort of stuff. Okay. Then about 11% discusses, religious, social, moral obligations, judicial obligations, commandments about how to live. That's about 10 to 11%. Okay. And then, over a third of the Quran, excuse me, is dedicated, excuse me, to descriptions of, what heaven is like, hell is like, the future resurrection, the day of judgment, the consequences of believing or not believing, the consequence of sin or worshiping other gods. A lot in that. You're looking at about over a third of the Quran is just all about largely judgment day sort of stuff. Okay, and what happens to the unbelievers and consequences of believing or not, etc. So a large portion of it is that. Okay. So anyways, hopefully this is all going okay for you guys. I'm wondering how long I've been yapping here, and I have to go pretty soon. And I think I'm going to, I have a lot to say. I know. I think I'll probably talk more and say more when I'm online than I would live in class. Okay, continue. Number 4, is to believe in his angels. Excuse me. So to believe in his angels. So there are all kinds of angels. There are the archangels, like Gabriel is the angel of revelation. And there's several other angels that have particular missions to do, particular jobs as such. Ministering angels that surround the throne, guard over heaven, guard over hell. Others that will meet you at death. Other angels that record your deeds. So you have various angels doing various things. Okay. And one thing about the angels, well, here, let me see here. Yeah. You also then have fallen angels. And so here you have a similar idea as you get in Judaism and Christianity of the figure of Satan, Lucifer, the accuser, the adversary, and those traditions. Here Satan's referred to as Shaitan, and also that can mean like little devils, like demons. They're fallen angels. And then Iblis is the common name for the devil as such, Iblis. Okay, these are the fallen angels that have disobeyed God. And so the story is that when God created Adam and Eve, he commanded that, Iblis was one of the main angels, an archangel in a sense, told him to come and bow down before the creation of man, because humans are, in a sense, a higher status than angels. And Iblis refused to bow down and honor the human being. And so that led to his being kicked out of heaven along with some of his followers, and they're the fallen angels. Okay, that's sort of the story of the fall of Iblis, okay, this archangel. Now, then you also have the jinn, I talked about as well in the first class. This was a very common belief in ancient Arabia, and these are spirit entities, also called to accept Islam. And so throughout the Quran, Muhammad will be saying as a prophet, all mankind and jinn, recognize that Allah alone is God, worship him alone, yada, yada, all mankind and jinn, accept Islam. You'll have that kind of phrase always addressing humanity and the jinn together. They are invited to accept Islam. So they can be atheists, polytheists, followers of other religions. Okay, they're just like humans, and they also need to accept Islam. Now, a big difference here, and I say, yes, jinns are spirits. You think, well, aren't angels spirits? What the difference are between them is this: angels have no gender. They're neither male nor female. Okay. Angels are created by God and they're immortal. They just live, keep on living until God decides to destroy them, in a sense. Okay. So they're not made of any gender. They're neither male or female, and they are immortal beings, and they're made out of light. Okay. Light itself. Whereas the jinn, they are created almost like an animal, humans, various species. They're a type of species, but they're largely invisible to us. They live in their own little spirit world, okay? But they are mortal beings. They are of gender, so you've got male and female, and they'll form families, and they'll have babies, and they'll grow old and die. They're just like humans, okay? They'll have their own kingdoms, and it's generally believed that they live under the earth. They have their kingdoms under the earth. And they aren't made of light the way the angels are, but they're made of smokeless fire, whereas we humans are made of dust, of clay. Okay, that's where the difference between the three categories of, beings as such, distinct from animals. Okay, so you've got the angels, humans, and then the jinn. And so, as I mentioned, they can appear in various forms. They often are deceptive. They're a little bit more prone to evil, but they also have a choice as to who they worship and how they live and what they do. And they're going to be facing Judgment Day along with humans, and along with all living beings are going to face. Every insect is going to be judged on Judgment Day. Every living being, okay? That's kind of leading to the next one. Because I think, that's all I'm going to say about the jinn. The last one is to believe in the last day, the day of judgment, where all living beings will be resurrected and will appear before the field of judgment before Allah. And as I mentioned, it's not just humans, but also the angels, the jinn, every animal, even insects, every living being is going to face judgment day, okay? And so you've got different imagery used here, that all the deeds would be put on a weigh scale, and they'll tilt one way or the other. That's a very quite universal. The ancient Egyptians have that image. The Zoroastrians blatantly have that in their texts and scriptures. Okay, that teaching about the weigh scales is a very common image belief in the ancient world. Okay, that your deeds are put on a scale that will determine your destiny. Another image that's used in the Quran, and this one that you also find in Zoroastrianism, is very ancient, goes back to the Zoroastrians, and that it's like you have to cross this bridge over the abyss of hell. And for those that are going to be saved and get to heaven, that bridge is going to get wider and wider so you won't fall off of it. But if you're doomed for hell, it's going to get narrow and narrow. It's like a tight rope they're going to be walking on, and you're going to fall off. Okay, so you'll have that image that's used. Generally, in here you'll have some variations of belief, okay, because as you do with every religion, there'll be different opinions as such, but for sure, all unbelievers are doomed, okay? If you are a polytheist, if you are an atheist, you are doomed. There is some hope for monotheists. Even if you're not Muslim, some will say, oh yes, as long as you believe in one God, and you're a good person, there's some hope. But it depends on who you're talking to, okay? Others will emphasize, no, you also have to believe that Muhammad is his messenger. To believe in him as a prophet is a requirement as well. As some say they do or don't. And then it's held that there's going to be, again, different levels of believers. There's going to be the masses who generally believed, yes, they were believers and they worshiped God. They were Muslims. They're basically good people, but they weren't perfect. And so some hold then that they will spend a bit of time in hell, like a type of purgatory, and eventually they'll be released then from heaven at some point, right? And then others, there are those, very few, who are so pure, so spiritual, who love God for God's sake alone. They're sort of the Sufis, the mystics, the true lovers of God, right? They weren't trying to be good people or religious people just so they could get saved and get to heaven. No. They truly just love God for God's sake alone, not for any ulterior motive of just getting to heaven. They will go to a higher heaven. They will have the reward of being directly in the very presence of Allah. Okay, so there's a kind of a sense of there being different levels like this. And heaven is seen as being, the usual imagery of being very much like earth, but like paradise, right? Where there'll be just delicious food. And you do have this idea of virgins giving you food, and that kind of imagery is there. And some try to interpret the phrase virgin as a word for raisins or grapes, but it's a challenge to interpret some of those passages like that you'll be greeted with all these virgins, and if they're just grapes. Anyway, but there's issues about that, okay? Anyway, there you go. There's in terms of belief in the last day. How are we doing time-wise? I'm just getting concerned. Okay, yeah. Now, so to continue a little bit on this. Now, in Islam, you don't have, a complex theology and doctrine of salvation as you do in Christianity. Okay, it's very simple in Islam. You sin, you ask Allah for forgiveness, He will forgive you your sin. Okay, that's sort of the general idea. Okay, and so there's no need for a complex. Oh, there has to be atonement for sin, the sacrifice of an animal to atone for sin, or of Christ, or what have you, and all this sorts of thing. It's just not there. And so what is kind of held is that the human problem isn't so much that we have a sinful nature or whatever. It's, you get the, we mentioned the doctrine of original sin that develops in Christianity through St. Augustine, okay, that not all Christians hold to, but most do. You don't have any of that here in Islam. Instead, they hold the problem for humanity is this. They come into forgetfulness of Allah, and they come into negligence. Those are the two evils, is forgetfulness and negligence. So they hold that, and this is not in the Quran, but it comes from the Hadith, from traditions and stories and beliefs that become basically a part of Muslim theology and teaching. Is held that everyone that's born is born a Muslim and pure of heart. You're born automatically in your soul and heart with a knowledge of that there is only one God. It's like it's an instinct that's there, born with you, okay? That there is only one God. But what happens is you grow up and you may be indoctrinated into atheism, indoctrinated to polytheism, to worship other gods, or whatever, right? Or just forget about God and just don't pay any attention to it. So you get corrupted over time, but you're born instinctively with the knowledge that there's only one God, okay? Number one. Number two, you're also born with a desire to want to do the will of God. But again, what happens over time, it gets corrupted. You will neglect seeking to do the will of God. You'll become lazy. You'll do evil. You'll do whatever you want to do and be selfish and what have you. So you end up being negligent. And so those are the two problems for humanity, is forgetfulness and negligence. And so what Islam is all about as a religion is to bring you back into remembrance, to remember there's only one God but Allah, and that you always are brought back to seek to do the will of God. And that's why, in terms of practice, you pray 5 times a day. Okay, we'll go into that later. But every 5 times a day, you're constantly brought back to remember that and confess there's only the one God, Allah, and to literally prostrate, bow down on your knees on the ground to submit to the will of Allah. Okay, and so that's why that practice is meant to correct the problem here of forgetfulness and negligence. Okay. So that's kind of the thrust and sense of it here. Now, the 6th one, and we'll end with this one here, is generally the Sunnis emphasize the doctrine of divine predestination as a 6th key thing that all Muslims should adhere to. And for the Shia, for them, it's to believe in their particular leaders called the imams. And I'll talk about the Shia more later, okay? This is going to be one key thing that you commit to as a Shiite, is to believe in your imam, your spiritual leader, as being the true leader over the Muslim community. Whereas for Sunnis, it is divine predestination, that Allah is the one who determines if you go to heaven or hell, Gehenna or paradise. And so here, you'll have teachings that Allah, He does not have to, this is a key, He does not have to reward the good. He does not have to punish the evil. It's like that would then impose a restriction on the will of Allah. He doesn't have to do anything. He chooses to do whatever He does. The only free being is Allah. Okay, and nothing can limit His freedom, because that would then limit His power. Okay, so He's not obligated to do anything. And it's held, and there's many, and I'll talk about the hadith. There's many hadiths and stories and traditions about this, where, for example, there's a story that one day Muhammad, I think it was Omar and Abu Bakr, or maybe Omar and Osman, I forget, one of the close companions, one of the caliphs there. They were having this discussion whether or not Allah wills people to heaven or hell. It was all predetermined. And Muhammad comes by and say, hey, what are you guys talking about? And he tells them, he says, oh, you know what? The angels in heaven one day had this exact debate. And this is what the answer is that right at the point, at the time of Adam, Allah had already predetermined from all the future generations, all the seed that would come out of Adam, that these people are destined for hell. These ones are destined for heaven. And then the idea then what happens is that we live out our destiny. We acquire, it's called the doctrine of acquisition they develop in Islam, that we acquire our destiny. So that if you are predestined for heaven, it'll be easy for you to be a Muslim. It'll be easy for you to pray 5 times a day, be very devout, be a very good person, very religious. It'll be easy for you. If you are predestined for hell, it's going to be really hard. And instead, it's going to be it's like you don't want to do this evil thing, but it's like you can't help yourself. It's almost like you just almost can't help but get yourself always in trouble and always sin and always do evil, right? So you can't help yourself. It's because it's your destiny. You've been predestined for it. And so on the one hand, it's seen as, they'll say that, well, this is still free will. You're just, acquiring your destiny by participating in it in some way, okay? But this has been a big issue of debate in early Islam. This sort of debate has been shut down, and it's like nothing gets debated anymore. But in the earlier period, this was a big debate, is this, okay? And however, the Orthodox version came down on that, nope, the will of Allah is supreme. It's all predestined, okay? That is there. If you really study Orthodox theology and teaching, it's there all over the place. Okay. So where are we? I think for now I'm going to end here, and I will continue this in another section because where am I here? I think I'm going to stop sharing. I've stopped sharing, so I'm here and it's still recording. Okay, and so I'm not too sure how long I went for here, but I'm going to upload this and I'll give it a label, and we shall continue in another session, as I'm just going to have a bit of a break, and I'll probably do one tonight and upload it as well, and do it bit by bit, okay? And I will also be posting the slides so that you can have them as well as the video that kind of correlates, okay? All right. Okay, feel free to, excuse me, ask any questions. And my voice is kind of going here. Ask any questions, okay, in terms of, I'm going to upload this on YouTube, so you should be able to put down in the comments there that any kind of questions that you have, okay? All right, so stay healthy and well. Wish you all well, and yeah, and hey, relax, okay? Yeah, be positive, everything will work out. All will lead to a greater good, I'm sure. Okay, all the best to you all, okay? Bye for now.